Spring has come into full effect here, and all of the plants, flowers, and animals are coming back to life. I'm absolutely loving seeing all the vibrant colors spread across the mountains here, but I will admit it also makes me a little bit nervous because the outfit that I'm making is a winter outfit, so I feel a little bit of pressure to get it finished before it gets far too hot for me to wear it. What you'll see in this video is me making the mock-up for the jacket of my walking ensemble. The pattern that I'm using is Angela Clayton's pattern that McCall's has produced, and I'm very excited about making it because I believe that this piece will actually pull together my entire outfit and the silhouette of it with just a few knitted finishing pieces remaining before I can call my entire ensemble done. When I compare the pattern piece to the fashion plate that I used as inspiration, I actually feel that the two of them are quite a close fit, and so I'm very excited to see what this fit is going to be like as I make the mock-up. I'll be doing a whole bunch of new sewing techniques, so I'm hoping that I can get a lot of feedback and input from everyone to help me make my finished jacket as good as possible given my current sewing skills. As I mentioned last time, I'm usually wearing a hand knit item, and right now I'm wearing a hand knit capelet that I really love, and I will leave a link down below to the pattern and yarn that I used because I wear this all the time, so I would highly recommend if anyone else is interested to knit this for themselves. Okay, so let's start making the mock-up for the jacket. The jacket is made up of an outer layer plus an inner lining. I decided when making this mock-up that I would just cut out all the pieces required for the outer lining in order to speed up the process a little bit of making the mock-up and to save a little bit of fabric as well of not having to also make an inner lining out of the muslin that I have on hand. Even though I decided to cut out pieces only for the one layer, there were still quite a few parts that I had to cut out, and I didn't have a lot of muslin left, so I did take the time to make sure that I laid everything out properly before pinning it down and cutting it out. And now I finished cutting out all the pieces needed to make one layer, just the outer layer of this jacket. And it's time to sew all the bits and pieces together. As I was working on sewing all the pieces together, I got to some sections where I think I might have cut something out incorrectly. As you can see, if I match up the marks here, the shoulder seam at the top doesn't really match. But if I match where the armhole opening is, then the markings don't really match. That didn't really make a lot of sense to me. I ended up sewing it so that the armholes matched, but then when you look at the bottom of that particular piece, you can see one is quite a bit longer than the other, so I think this is something that I might have to watch out for in my final piece. After finishing the body of my jacket, it was time to attach the sleeves. This is the first time I have ever set sleeves in my life, and it was quite difficult to get it pinned correctly, get the sleeves gathered down appropriately, and then to make sure that everything was sewed on with the sleeves even facing in the right direction. As you'll see in the final product, there's definitely some improvements that need to happen, some changes that need to happen to make sure that the sleeves sit correctly, but I am excited that I set sleeves for the first time ever in a somewhat successful way. Before trying on my jacket, I decided to press out the front lapels, front collar section, front jacket sections. I'm not exactly sure what to call them, but this is kind of where the collar would turn over, so I decided to iron that and press that out a little bit so that it would sit nicer when I was trying it on. And here's the first moment of truth where I've actually tried on my jacket with everything else on underneath to see how the fit is. I'm pretty happy with the overall effect of the jacket, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. The most important one is where the waist sits. I know this from a lot of the other sewing that I've done with the other items, especially the tops, is that I have a very long torso, and so I typically have to move the waistline downwards. In order to get a better estimate of exactly how far down the waistline would have to go and to see exactly how that would sit, I decided to alter the first mock-up. First, I marked where the waistline would be on each piece because each piece typically has a waistline marking, and then after I marked that line straight across, I decided to cut the jacket all the way across. After cutting the jacket across, I used my last large piece of muslin fabric that I had available in order to create a bit of an extension piece. I know this isn't completely accurate or exact, but I was hoping that it would give me a better idea of how much longer this jacket would need to be and how much longer I'd need to make each piece in order for it to fit me properly. I decided on using a rough guesstimate of 3 inches, which I marked at every point above where I had pinned the extra piece of muslin before, in order to then pin the top half of the jacket back on at exactly 3 inches distance at each part below the bottom. After doing all of that, I tried the jacket back on to see how I liked that length. It wasn't very easy to try it on again because there are so many pins in it now and a bit of extra fabric flapping around. But I will say that, as you can probably tell from my expression, I don't think that this is the right fit either. I think at this point it is a little bit too long. You can see in the back it's actually sitting a little bit strangely where it hits the skirt, and I think that's because the jacket is now too long. So I unpinned everything again and repinned everything about half the distance previous, which is about 1.5 inches longer than before. When I tried on the mock-up with this 1.5 extra inches of length at the waist, I think that this jacket sits much better in the waist. Fixing the length of the jacket and the positioning of the waist was an incredibly important alteration to make in order for this jacket to fit properly. However, I could definitely see a few other things that needed to be changed when I made my final version, and one of those things is the positioning of the shoulders. If you can see here, my right shoulder actually seems to sit pretty well, but the left shoulder seam seems to be too wide. It's almost as if the jacket is drooping off of my left shoulder. The other thing that needs fixing is the length of the arms. So while I believe setting the shoulders correctly will fix most of the uneven length problem between my right and left arm, I do still think that it'll be quite a bit too short. So I have to increase the length, and I also have to make sure when I create the final version that I sew my sleeves the right way around. As you can see here, I accidentally sewed my right sleeve inside out. I was then really excited to get to making my finished jacket that I started laying out my pattern pieces on my beautiful blue twill fabric on the large surface that I have outside that I can use. Out of nowhere though, this crazy windstorm picked up that started blowing everything all over the place, and I was in real danger of losing my pattern pieces and maybe even my fabric. So I acted quite quickly to save everything, roll everything up, catch any pieces that had gone flying, and maybe take it as a sign that I needed to first make another mock-up with some of the alterations that I discussed previously before cutting into my final fabric for my finished piece. In order to transfer the increased length of the jacket at the waist to the pattern pieces so that it would be easier for me to cut it out of my second mock-up, I used a piece of paper to extend each of the jacket pieces at the waist. After pinning it to the piece of paper exactly 1.5 inches apart, I also trimmed the right and left sides to approximately the shape of the piece in order to make it easier for me to cut out my pattern pieces. After extending all of the jacket body pieces by about 1.5 inches and extending the arm pieces or the sleeve pieces by about 3/4 inch, I pinned everything down to the muslin. I ran out of muslin with my first mock-up, so I actually had to first obtain more muslin in order for me to make this second mock-up. I then sewed all of the cutout pieces back together following the same instructions, but paying very close attention to how I set the sleeves in the shoulders to make sure that my left shoulder wouldn't droop. This time for the second mock-up, I also decided to cut less corners, and instead of just sewing together the outer layer, I sewed together the outer layer as well as the inner lining. I think that the length of this jacket is now much better too, but I do still see that there's quite a problem with the shoulders. You can still see that while the right shoulder and the puff seems to stand upright, the left kind of hangs off of my shoulder and droops. I thought that this might have been a problem with the width of the shoulders. Maybe they were different between my right and my left. So I measured both the width of my right shoulder and the left shoulder, but I found that they were actually exactly the same. Then, while standing in front of the mirror while I was taking these measurements, I looked at my posture and I noticed that my left shoulder actually drops quite a far bit lower than my right. I do have slight scoliosis, and maybe it's actually affecting the way that this jacket sits on me. I've thus decided in my final jacket to actually take in the width of my left shoulder a little bit more in order to compensate for how much lower my left shoulder sits than my right. I've also been thinking about taking in the width of my right shoulder, but I'm not so sure, so maybe you guys can give me some feedback and let me know if I should also make my right shoulder a little bit less wide. Another issue that I can see is that there is some puckering at the bottom front portions of my jacket, and I believe that's because I didn't make the lining layer quite long enough when I was extending my pieces. I did hem the outer layer of the jacket at the bottom, just not the inner lining here at the back, so I wouldn't expect the puckering to happen in the front. So that's another thing that I need to fix in the final version of this jacket. And that's all I can see at the moment. If you guys have any other suggestions before I make my final piece, please do let me know, because I would love to get all the feedback that I can. And that is it for this video. Thank you again so much for watching. I can't wait to show you my finished jacket in the next one. See you all then.